Welcome to the 9th episode of The View from Here. As usual, we'll offer a mixture of serious and lighter topics. We'll start with a brief interview, citizen survey number 2, followed by some serious news that's not covered in the media. The gravity of this news is then balanced by several light musical interludes, ranging from a recorded duet to a pretty wild piano boogie woogie. And finally, if we have enough time left, we'll show a fascinating video about a boy's early memories that appeared on national TV. And so we'll start with this interview with Pam Clough at the Fusion Studio in Keene. That's the first video on our list today. And we'll go right there now. All right, this will be another citizen interview, and she will tell you her name and what she does herself. So give us your name, the town you live in, occupation, and take your time to explain all of that.
Hi, I'm Pamela Clough. My husband and I own Keene Fusion Studios, and I personally am a certified Pilates teacher, a certified TRX coach. I do personal training and teach group exercise classes. And my husband teaches ballroom dancing and also does personal training and teaches group exercise classes.
Again, I'm going to interrupt there for a moment because one of those I take part in, and people wouldn't know about that one. It is for senior citizens, and it is not as rough and difficult as the ones that Pam teaches, but it's a very, a lot of it is sitting on a chair, but you do all kinds of exercises with your legs, with your feet, you stand up, balance exercises, and so the exercise classes here span an incredibly wide variety. All right.
Thank you, Gerhard.
Here are the 4 questions. Number 1, what are the 1 or 2 most troubling issues facing the United States?
That's a big question. And I would say not just the United States, but also I think our world. And that is, we seem to be so polarized in our views and our beliefs that there seems to be very little tolerance for people who have either an opposing view or don't, maybe they don't belong to the same political party or religion, maybe their color is different. And I don't even think that we're at a place right now where we can embrace diversity. We first have to tolerate diversity and to learn that we're all human and we are all dealing with the same things.
I think you got one major problem there, yes. What do you think should be done to resolve that issue?
I think we need to learn how to talk to one another and hear one another as opposed to shouting our beliefs and then not listening. I have a dear client who at one time did UN peacekeeping missions. And I remember that he was in a place where there was a lot of ethnic genocide. And he brought 2 different groups together that were mothers who had lost children. And the way he got them talking, I'll get a little choked up, is to talk about what it felt like to lose their loved ones and to learn that they all suffered. They all felt the loss. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember, that we all love our children. We all get hungry. We all get cold. We all need water. And perhaps that can help us to start listening to one another and accepting one another.
Yes, indeed. What is happening to children all over the world right now, it's just amazing. And I do think we can do a lot better than we are doing. And maybe we can get a little closer, although I don't think it's going to be any immediate resolution there. Well, what do you see as hopeful and helpful work that's already being done to build a better world? You mentioned a little bit of that.
Yes. It seems to me that I'm not the only one who feels this way. And perhaps there's a grassroots effort that there are a lot of us who feel this way, and we are ready to have our voices heard, that we need to speak up, we need to participate in being part of this positive change.
Right, thank you. And finally, what do you do in your personal life to counterbalance the darkness, the heaviness of the current world? In other words, what activities make you happy and nourish your spirit?
Well, there are a lot of them, actually. Meditation helps, introspection, listening to music, dancing, enjoying the people that I'm with, learning about people, hearing their stories. All of that can be so uplifting, looking for the positive and not focusing on the negative. And I think being an active participant in life.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Gerhard.
All right. What I have next ties right in with the problems that Pam Clough was mentioning. And you'll have to forgive me if I get a little hot under the collar, but I think you'll find it interesting, and you may not have been aware of this at all. I like to mention some recent news that shows how dumbed down and dangerous our media coverage has become on some subjects. It is an illustration of the extreme polarization of our society, also mentioned by Pam. We are not willing to listen to each other. It certainly illustrates that. Here, 300 years after the Salem witch trials, we now have a major newspaper, the Boston Herald, calling for new witches, not to be burned this time, but to be hung. On May 8th of this year, 2017, the Boston Herald wrote that parents debating vaccination, quote, ought to be a hanging offense. Yes, you know, a hanging offense. Well, contrast that news item with what happened 2 days later in Sweden on May 10th. And of course, that was not reported by the media. I will tell you more about what happened in Sweden. There, the Swedish Riksdag, which is the parliament, came as the following statement. They stated, quote, "It would violate our Swedish constitution if we introduced compulsory vaccinations or mandatory vaccinations." And then the parliament takes note of, again, quote, "the massive resistance to all forms of coercion with regard to vaccinations." And ultimately, there's also a remark there in that report in Sweden by, quote, "frequent serious adverse reactions in children who receive vaccinations." You don't hear that discussed in our Congress, as far as I know. Well, let's go right to the center of this, because to understand this, we need to go to the origin in the history of vaccinations, and that is kind of nicely summarized in this, which you can find on the internet. It's right there. In the 1980s, the vaccine industry had so many lawsuits that cost them so much money. They said, we're not going to make vaccines any longer unless you hold us liable of any kind of lawsuits like that. And then Congress passed something highly unusual, not done for any other industry ever, before or after. Namely, it promised to hold the vaccine industry free from any liability about vaccines, and it created a vaccine institution that would take care of the harm done by vaccines. Now, the interesting thing is that, yes, vaccines do harm, and those lawsuits had a basis. But now the government took over the paying for the harm done by vaccines. This statement here from the Supreme Court, decided February 22, 2011, gives the history. The National Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 created a no-fault compensation program to stabilize a vaccine market and to facilitate compensation to claimants. Most importantly, the Act eliminates manufacturers' liability for a vaccine's unavoidable adverse side effects. So we can't discuss those while they are clearly recognized. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Attorney Robert F. Kennedy, a well-known and respected environmental lawyer for many years, helping to clean up all the waters of America, the rivers and the harbors, and with a whole big organization, he has come forward criticizing such things as mercury, which is still found in vaccines. And he explains, and when he appeared on a Tucker Carlson show recently, the pharmaceutical industry is so powerful, they give $5.4 billion a year to the media. That's why the media is so totally mum, because they're so afraid of endangering that money. They've gotten rid of the lawyers, says Kennedy, so there is no legal interest in those cases. They have really been able to control the debate and silence people like me. Asked how things got this bad, Robert Kennedy then explained that Congress granted blanket legal immunity, which we have just looked at here, when it comes to vaccines. And Kennedy also explains that the vaccine regimen changed dramatically in time because there are so many more vaccines now. He mentions that he, as a child, got 3 vaccines and that was fully compliant. He is now 63 years old. Then he says, my children got 69 doses of 16 vaccines to be compliant. And a lot of these vaccines aren't even for communicable diseases, like hepatitis B, which comes from unprotected sex, or using or sharing needles. Why do we give that to a child on the first day of their life, says Kennedy? Well, enough about Robert Kennedy for the moment. Let's look a little further at vaccine safety. The generally promoted and accepted view is that a few vaccines may do some damage to a few children, but that this is for the greater good. If as a new parent you decide to research this issue, you find that $3.5 billion has been paid by the government to parents of vaccine-damaged children through the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. We are told that any connection between autism and vaccines has been scientifically disproven. Yet, several cases for which large amounts of money have been awarded to parents of seriously damaged children by this government program, those cases mention all the symptoms that are on the list of autism that were noted in this damaged child, but they simply avoid using the word autism, although all those symptoms are listed as being there. And then finally, how can we keep saying that no connection exists between vaccines and autism when a whistleblower and leading scientist at the CDC, Dr. William Thompson, has charged that the results of a CDC study on the connection between the MMR vaccine, that is measles, mumps, and rubella, that connection between that vaccine and autism, he says, has been covered up. In the movie Vaxxed, which is available, by the way, at the Keene Library, you can hear the voice of Dr. William Thompson describing the serious cover-up, which has so far been uninvestigated. In a few weeks, it will be a full 2 years since Congressman Bill Posey stood on the floor of Congress asking that Dr. Thompson be subpoenaed, which is the only way his testimony can be officially heard. You can find Mr. Posey's speech on YouTube. Congress has done nothing in these 2 years, and what's worse, the media never even mentioned this significant event. So, are we willing to look at all the facts and evidence before us? You answer that question. Let's end this discussion of vaccines today with this sensible and reasonable proposition. There are benefits and risks to using vaccines, and there are risks and benefits to not vaccinating. There are clear risks to the official schedule for vaccines, especially for very young children. We all have a right to consult our own medical advisors. Some of these advise just a few vaccines at a different time schedule. Others advise against vaccines, suggesting that building strong immune systems is the best assurance of good health and weathering illnesses. Well, if Sweden, which we call a socialist country, affirms the right of its citizens to decide what is done to their bodies and the bodies of their children, then how in the blazes can we here in America, the bastion of freedom, begin to take away that choice from our citizens, as we are doing more and more? I was going to have a discussion on herd immunity, which you should look further into if you believe in the official story there, because it comes from a time from before vaccines, and herd immunity doesn't exist any longer because vaccines only temporarily protect against illnesses, and the permanent immunity we used to have, that's how herd immunity actually existed. That no longer exists. It doesn't. So we are blaming outbreaks, unavoidable outbreaks of measles and pertussis on unvaccinated children, but basically this is it's demonizing those who chose a road that does not conform to the wishes and profit motives of the pharmaceutical medical industry. So finally, I want to show you here this series of 7 episodes is now being shown on Cheshire Community TV. I believe we're into the 3rd chapter, and I will donate this whole series also to the Keene Public Library when we are through here at Cheshire TV, and I think you should be aware of that. And finally, we will go now to some lighter things, because it's time for that. It's time for some fun and some music. And we'll start with the first video of a recorded duet celebrating the start of summer, played by my friend Joan Scheimer and myself. We're going to play around Summer is a Comin' In, which seems to go back, if you can believe it, as far as 1226, 800 years ago. Give me a tempo. Well, I enjoy music, and the last question on the citizen survey, I would answer for myself that I keep my life in balance by enjoying all kinds of music. And I want to give you some samples. I've found on the internet, because if you Google street music videos or flash crowds, which is a different form of kind of unexpected music in public places, what makes these things such fun is the element of surprise shown on the faces of people who stop to enjoy this unexpected gift. And here next is one example from a shopping mall somewhere in England. It's a pretty wild boogie woogie, and you'll have to forgive me, but I kind of like it. Well, it has a driving rhythm, and I also like watching boogie woogie dancing and all kind of dances, moving to music. All right, the next one, before we have the next one, I just want to mention quickly that there are the most amazing videos all over the world. One that I'd hoped to get here, but I could not download it, it didn't work, is in the subway in Buenos Aires in Argentina. A young man sits on the floor of the subway. He doesn't even have a stand, sits on the floor with a keyboard on his lap, and he plays the most difficult classical music by heart. He is interviewed by a tourist, and he tells him he learned to play by himself. And yes, he earns his living completely from playing in the subway. But instead of that, we will go to something else next, our last video for today. There's another video taking place in Munich, Germany, on a shopping mall. It's coming next, and you will see what happens. Mozart in the jungle. right. The video for which we did not have time today, I will show the next time. Thank you very much for being there. I hope you enjoy the variety. You probably will dislike some of the things I offer, but I will always try to offer quite a variety of things and hope to see you the next time. Thank you very much.